Um, Good that MJ brought up the issue of the war on Gaza, because I'm sure those of you who watch Al Jazeera will know what a huge moment that was for us and the coverage that we managed to provide. And a big part post the war, step further if you like, the Creative Commons, our footage that we broadcast and that we had pretty much exclusively from inside Gaza during that war. An extraordinary time it was. And the idea of Creative Commons was to get that out there so that the full story could be told.
I want to start first to frame by saying that, again, we didn't want to do 101s on new media, but I want to. Joshua talked about the business model of media, and I think the business model of media has fundamentally defined the way that media happened. It used to cost, it still costs, a tremendous amount. Is a completely different thing. And to understand why it's different, how it's different, and the importance of it going forward, you have to discuss and understand a little bit about the technology. The architecture of the internet is what keeps it open, which allows people to connect without asking permission. And the architecture of the internet is also what allows it to continue to get lower cost, to continue to provide access at such a low price. And failure in this architecture, which is fundamentally political, will also can bring the demise of, or change the future of new media. So before we had the internet, we have this old style. This is the technical view of how standards were created. This is how television standards are created. This is how GSM is created. This is how most technical things in the world work. So you have governments and large corporations, and they hire a bunch of very smart people who get together, and they are the experts, and they go to international standards bodies that are sanctioned by the United Nations and other places. I pick on ITU because I think that they're for the internet, sort of the government side of it, but they get together once a year, wear neckties, and have long conversations about every possible thing that could go wrong, and they create huge specifications that couldn't possibly be read by any single individual, that then get sent to large contractors in R&D labs where they're created, generated, and produced into products costing millions and millions of dollars. They're very robust. And then the consumers buy this and pay for it in the form of fees and taxes that go back into large companies and governments. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is the biggest weakness that I see in this region, is that the telephone monopolies are still the biggest contributors to revenue in many Arab countries. And because of that, they still like this model, which is a model of control, a model of safety, which doesn't allow anyone to participate without some sort of authority in this structure. And this is the architecture of the traditional media as well. In the internet, we have what we call internet innovation. The internet itself is the way that standards are created. On the internet, you have users and venture capitalists. Standards are organizations, small companies, big companies, governments, and experts, all getting together, talking about things on the internet. We have mailing lists, we have ad hoc committees, and there is a credo that we have. We call it rough consensus running code. So what you do is when you want to create a standard on the internet, well, you write some code that does something, and people discuss it, and people work on it, and it evolves over time. And most of the specifications from these big intergovernmental agencies, they're meters high. Internet specifications tend to be several pages long, so that a student at some university could write a useful application on an internet standard, whereas a telephone GSM standard would require millions and millions of dollars. And this is the way, with open source and the internet, that standards get developed on the internet. And this architecture for creating standards is one of the fundamental differences between the open innovation on the internet and the systematic and rigorous standard systems that we had in the past. This is, again, a slightly technical view of the world, but I call it the Openstack. So there are layers of the internet. So at the very bottom of the internet, you have the internet protocol. This is what the internet service providers used to connect everyone's computers together. People my generation will remember when you couldn't connect a Macintosh to a PC. The hardware was different. You could connect them together, but then you had Windows Network and you had Apple Talk. The printers didn't work. You could buy software like Banyan Vines and Novell that would connect your Macintosh and your PC, but there were all these proprietary network standards. We eventually, because of actually some of the funding originally came from the US government, were able to come up with an open standard for connecting computers together and addressing them in a single, it wasn't necessarily the smartest standard, by the way, but it was the one least encumbered by patents, was very simple and easy to use, and everyone started writing free software that used this internet standard. So we created the Internet Protocol. And the Internet Protocol, right now, the standards around the Internet Protocol are shepherded and in the custody of the Internet Engineering Task Force, which again is a non-governmental ad hoc committee. Anyone can participate, teenagers participate, most of the stuff goes on mailing lists, and it's a very open system for creating new internet standards. The World Wide Web, and this is, again, a lot of people think of the World Wide Web when you hear about the internet, but the World Wide Web came years after the internet was originally born. Again, this is an open standard that is mostly shepherded by the World Wide Web Consortium. Again, a non-governmental, non-profit organization that gets together and tries to work on the new standards about how the web works. We're currently working on HTML5, which is the next version of the web, and I'll describe an interesting announcement there. But again, this is an ad hoc committee without official government sanctions. Many governments, when I go in and talk to them, they are still, even about the World Wide Web, uncomfortable about the fact that there's no government influence over the World Wide Web. My organization, Creative Commons, is trying to create another standard, which is the standard for the copyright layer. So as we connect the internet and make it easier and easier for people to connect, what you find suddenly is that the next layer of friction, because each of these is a layer of friction, you connect the network together and remove the network friction, and then you realize you have a lot of cost and friction in connecting the content and software together. So we created a standard called the World Wide Web. Well, now that we have the World Wide Web, what you find is when you connect all these brilliant minds together, there is a copyright friction. Before, it made total sense for movie producers and television producers to go to Cannes and sip champagne and have their expensive lawyers come in and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees because each program was worth millions of dollars. Well, when you have user-generated content and you're trying to mix Al Jazeera content with Wikipedia content with student courseware, you can't afford thousands of dollars in legal fees, and you can't afford to have this be complex across languages. We're trying to create an open standard for the legal layer, and so this is the next layer in the stack, is Creative Commons, and I'll give a few examples. Al Jazeera is the first broadcaster in the world to use Creative Commons on broadcast quality footage, so I'm very proud of that. The other component of this ecosystem is open source software. So if you think about Google, Google probably cost a couple of $1,000s to make. So there are students at the university, they bought an old PC, put a PC together, and they started using Apache for the web server. They probably used some open database standards, open source, and free access to the internet. They were able to connect it to the Stanford University network. I think it was google.stanford.edu. And without asking any permission, without paying any fees, they were immediately able to access the world. And if we had built this in the old telephone companies, I'm sorry to keep beating up on telephone companies, they're just one example, but if we had built this in the old regime, it probably would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars, taken a decade, and wouldn't work. But instead, we have a couple of students that are able to build something like this for thousands of dollars. A lot of this thanks to open source software, which again exists because it existed before the internet, but it became highly successful with the internet because the internet allowed people to connect to each other and collaborate and create these amazing public assets at a very low cost, and distributed them at a very low cost. This is a huge announcement that just happened last week, and I really want Al Jazeera to focus on this. We've been working, I'm on the board of the Mozilla Foundation, which makes Firefox, but we've been collaborating now with Microsoft and Google and all the other, and Opera, who's making the other browsers, I forgot the Opera logo, I'm sorry, on open video. And so if you know, like YouTube and all these other places, they use Flash, typically. And Flash, and this gets a little bit technical, but Flash is a proprietary technology by one company that allows you to do the video. And one of the problems is that from a technical perspective, we can't see what's going on inside the video. We don't have access to the contents. You have to pay fees. It's not open. You can license it, but you can't participate in this video internet stuff without asking permission. It's always been very difficult. So in HTML5, we've been working very hard on an open video initiative so that video would become a first-class citizen of the internet, just like text and images have. The announcement this last week was a key announcement. Google has acquired a company that had a key compression technology for video called VP8. And this gets a little technical, but we've announced jointly. First of all, Google bought all the patents and has given it away to the internet for free, or to the world for free. And this is like Al Jazeera, this is very significant. But the key to this is going to be the core compression technology in a new open video format called WebM, I think. And the neat thing is, now that it's an open video format, everyone has access. So this little video here is a video of some guys from Mozilla. It's running JavaScript on it, and it's running face recognition software. And the face recognition software, JavaScript, goes and recognizes these two people and pulls their tweets up and puts it on top of the video. And so there's all kinds of neat things that you can do with video once it's open. You won't have to license stuff. You won't have to add browser plugins. It will all be built into the browsers as default. So, and YouTube is going to be switching and will make all of their video available under this new codec. And so it's kind of an unfortunate incident for Adobe, but it's a great thing for the web. And so I would really like the people who are creating content and other things to look into open video, because this is going to be a significant change in the power structure. And again, becoming more open and creating more competition. And the sharing part, I think the title of my talk was more about free and sharing, and I know Mohammed is probably, hopefully, going to talk a little bit about how Al Jazeera uses Creative Commons, and Joshua talked about the business models and how, you know, the idea of gated and paid walls and things like that doesn't seem to work, just because so much of it is about attention and popularity and things like that. Creative Commons is trying to be a lubricant or a way for people to come up with new business models. So just giving things away for free, it doesn't seem like a very good business model. Let me give you a couple of examples. Before we go into the specific examples, just for those of you who don't know what Creative Commons does, is we allow people who create content to make several choices about how their content can be shared. All of our licenses require the user of your content to give you attribution. Some of the licenses, you can make a choice about whether the derivative works. So if somebody remixes your work, whether it has to be relicensed under the same license. For instance, Wikipedia uses this license. The other thing you can do is you can restrict the reuse of your works to non-commercial use only. And you can also restrict the creation of derivative works. So basically, you can share, but only share it as is. So if you select combination of these choices, we create a license for you. And a license is a legal document that's in 51 jurisdictions, and we create a little icon that is human readable. The license is lawyer readable. And these licenses are provided for free, and you can put them on your content, you can put them on the website. There are 350 million pieces of content licensed under our licenses. Just to give you a couple of examples so that you understand that free isn't just about not making any money. 9 Inch Nails, which is a band, I think this was last year, they released a CD called Ghost, but they gave all of their music away for free. So they used the Creative Commons attribution non-commercial share alike, which basically means that you can use this for non-commercial use, you can share it with your friends, you can create remixes, you have to share them back. But they had a website that they created, and they had these expensive limited edition box sets and picture books and stuff. They did $1.6 million in 1 week on their website. And this is a fundamental difference in the business model. Instead of trying to get a little tiny piece of revenue from millions of people, what they said was, well, we'll just give all of that away because that's going to be hard to collect anyway. It provides attention for us, shows our respect to the fans, and we're going to create our own page instead of using a record store or something else. And the idea, and this, Japanese anime companies are doing this too, but this is about taking more money from fewer people and really trying to make a direct connection with the people that you're talking to rather than trying to look at yourself as mass. Al Jazeera, Mohammed, are you going to talk about this? Okay, well, Al Jazeera is one of our best examples. You made the announcement today, and I hope that it means that you'll use more CC on more of your content. Right now, it's mostly Gaza footage that's CC licensed, which is still great because it has been an incredible infusion of content to Wikipedia as one of the main users. Wikipedia, and this is a story I want to spend just a minute on because it's very important. Until last year, Wikipedia did not use a Creative Commons license. I think everybody knows what Wikipedia is, right? And it uses, you use a license from the Free Software Foundation that was originally intended for making software manuals, because Creative Commons didn't exist when they created Wikipedia. 4 or 5 years we spent with the Free Software Foundation and the Wikipedia community to convert Wikipedia to a Creative Commons license. Now, why is this important? So the Wikipedia license was very similar to the Creative Commons license. It was a license that said you can do whatever you want with this content, including commercial use, but you must share every derivative version back to our community under the same license, which is exactly what the Creative Commons Share Alike license says. The problem is it was a different license. So we have hundreds of universities creating courseware under a Creative Commons Share Alike license in the Open Courseware Consortium, but you couldn't mix it with the Wikipedia content because the two licenses were different. It's like having two internets. If you had the Arab internet and the American internet, and you had to somehow figure out a way to connect these two, it would be impossible if the protocol was different. And so this is also really important. Just making it free, just announcing we're going to give it all away for free, and that's also a really good first step, is not still interoperable, because the legal stuff is a lot like technical stuff. 99% compatible is still not compatible. And so one of the things that turns me into somewhat of an imperialist is I want to go around and destroy what we call license proliferation. This is a problem. The Japanese government's done it. The BBC has done it. Many great institutions see things like Creative Commons and free and open source, and they create their own vanity licenses, which requires lawyers to read them again, requires people to translate them again, and ultimately isn't compatible with the other licenses. And so we really would like people to understand that Creative Commons is not just a vendor, which is what some governments have called us. We are part of an international group of people in 80 countries having a conversation about how all interoperable licenses should be, and we should all try to have one conversation rather than split off and fork into separate conversations. And luckily, the Wikipedia community has decided to join our conversation. Other users that are notable, when Barack Obama's, it was great for us, because exactly at noon during the inauguration, or I guess the inauguration got changed because of the weather or something, but they updated the website and put Creative Commons on the website, which was a great signal for us, and we've been working with the White House, and the new administration has been much more supportive about open licensing, and having Al Jazeera and the White House both start using Creative Commons in the same year was also a really interesting political statement. And I'm going to leave my remarks there because I'm going to try to be cognizant of the time, but hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation later. Thank you very much.